and welcome to New England Authors. We present the best of our region, and we have different guests every time. And today we have two wonderful musicians on the show. May I introduce them? Julie Leven, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And Francine Trester, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Now, Julie, you started this organization called Shelter Music. Right?
Indeed, yes.
You're a violinist, right?
I am a violinist. And Shelter Music Boston is the official and full name of the organization.
Okay.
It's almost 10 years old.
Yes. I was around at the beginning.
That's right.
Yes. I went to your first fundraiser or whatever it was.
Indeed.
Yes.
Thank you for attending.
All right.
Yes.
So tell us, what is Shelter Music?
Shelter Music Boston is a social service organization that delivers classical chamber music concerts, always performed to the highest artistic standards, to homeless shelters and centers serving individuals who are recovering from substance abuse. Mm-hmm. We perform once a month for our partner organizations, and currently we have 7 adult partner organizations. And
7 shelters, in other words.
Yes, 7 different, some of them are shelters and some of them are recovery centers, but a total of 7.
Yeah.
And each partner receives a concert once a month. And the same team of musicians will deliver that program to each of our partner venues during the month. So for instance, actually the 3rd week of the month is Shelter Week. And on the 3rd Wednesday of the month, our musicians will be at the Shattuck Shelter in Jamaica Plain, a shelter we have actually served since 2010. Mm-hmm. So we are, in essence, an ensemble in residence there. Similar to the idea that a university might have a string quartet in residence, so the community can benefit from access to musicians who are committed to working at that level and being embedded in the community. So it's really that idea that even these unconventional venues deserve to have an artistic ensemble embedded in their community so that the individuals served there can have direct access to the transformational aspect of live classical music.
And what reception do you get when you go in, you play a string trio or whatever? What do the residents say?
The guests in the shelters and the residents at the residential recovery centers are amazed by the music.
Yeah.
And it is, we consistently have responses such as, I didn't think I was going to be interested in classical music. This is awesome. I want to know how to spell this composer's name. Do you have a recording? I want to hear you play this music again at 3 a.m. when I'm stressed out. Because right now I feel calm, and you brought that to me via this classical music.
Interesting.
And their concerts are very interactive. They're constructed so that audience members are made to feel comfortable about an unfamiliar genre, are welcome to ask questions about the music, have a dialogue with the musicians. So it's a learning experience. And for that hour to 90 minutes that we are in the shelter or the recovery center, we are a community together.
Yeah.
And we are creating a concert together, because after all, you can't have a concert without an audience.
Right, right. And Francine, have you played in any of these venues?
I have not played in them, but I've written music for.
You're a composer.
I'm a composer, yeah.
Right.
And so last year I had the privilege of attending one of the Shelter Music concerts, and everything Julie just said is true tenfold.
Yeah.
The audience participation, the reaction. It was beautiful. It really was a beautiful thing to be a part of.
Classical music was written for regular people.
That's right.
Yeah.
One of the things we say is that this is a form of storytelling. And the people who told these stories, this was their vocabulary.
Yeah.
And they're telling stories about human emotions. And we all have stories and we all have emotions. And our audiences really understand that, and it welcomes them to give it a try.
Yeah. Now, you commissioned Francine to write an opera.
Yes,
Lo
I
and
did.
behold, now that's really, and this is what we want to talk about today.
Yes.
And what subject did you choose for this opera?
So you had suggested Florence Price, the composer Florence Price, and because the opera is actually going to be paired with some of her music, on the same program.
Yeah.
So the audience gets to hear her story, and then it ends with, well, maybe you'll hear some of my music someday.
Yes,
and then
yes.
it's followed by hearing her
So
music.
tell us, who is Florence Price?
So Florence Price was an African-American composer. She is notable for being the first African-American woman to have her music played by a symphony orchestra, really among the first to be recognized as a symphonic composer, period.
Yeah.
And then the Chicago Symphony premiered her music, and other works, other symphonies, other orchestral works as well. And so she knew success in her lifetime, but she also knew plenty of hardship as well.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
So it's a fascinating story about overcoming and success and hardship. So
including she was temporarily homeless.
Yes.
Yeah.
She witnessed a lynching in Little Rock, Arkansas, her hometown, that compelled her to move to Chicago.
Yeah.
There's so many aspects of her story.
Single motherhood,
exactly. Suffered domestic abuse, and there's so many aspects of her story that are the same circumstances many of our audience members are experiencing in their daily lives.
Yes.
And she managed to still do her creative work.
Yeah.
And that was what compelled me to want to tell her story to our audiences.
Yeah. So when you told me that you had commissioned this opera, I thought it would have something to do with homelessness and so on. Yeah.
Indeed.
Interesting.
And I just want to clarify, I did have this idea, and it is Shelter Music Boston that actually made the commission. So it's a big team effort.
Yes,
I
understand.
So,
you're the founder, but
Yes.
it's a very big team effort.
Thank you. Yes.
So, let's go back to Francine Price. She came here to study music at the New England Conservatory of Music. That's right.
Yeah. So she was born in Little Rock.
Yeah.
Was valedictorian of her high school.
Yeah.
And
At a young age.
Yes. Yeah. And I think one of her first pieces, I think, was at age 4.
Child prodigy.
Child prodigy. Went to NEC, was one of very few women, and of course, African American individuals, and I think graduated with honors, a double degree, and so.
She was 16 when she came to NEC.
Yeah.
To New England
I beg your
Conservatory.
pardon?
16. Yeah.
She was 16 years old.
Oh, she was 16.
when
Yeah.
she came to New England Conservatory.
Right,
So
right.
very young woman.
Yeah.
In the early 20th century, living alone in a big city, a young woman from the South who was black.
Who was black? Yeah. But
That alone
she
is
was
a
she was mixed race.
She's
and,
mixed
That's
race.
correct. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yes.
And people said, "Oh, you should say you're Mexican." So
Yeah.
she was,
So her mom encouraged her to quote pass as Mexican.
Yeah. So she studied under George Chadwick. You want to tell us he was a very big figure in the musical history of this region. Can you talk a little about him, either you or Julie?
Not so much. I mean, I think her style overlaps to some degree with his. It's a sort of American sound, and
He certainly encouraged that in her.
yeah. Well, actually,
Yes.
he encouraged her to also incorporate some of her
Spiritual.
the spiritual
Yes.
and
That's
yeah,
what I meant.
yeah,
Her own
yeah,
traditional
yeah.
music.
Because she was a very religious person, and she included all the kind of church music, right, into her music.
Yeah.
As we were
Spirituals.
talking, I listened to a lot of her music, and I see very American roots. I see aspects of Copeland, Aaron Copeland, and other American writers in her. But it's quite traditional music, right?
Yeah. And it's a mix of, American, and there's the European tradition, her orchestrations and everything also has that influence in it too. And then she just brings her own, and then just her own magic, just totally individual quality. Yeah. That has no affiliation other than.
Her own creativity.
Yes. So this is New England Authors here, and we're doing something a little bit different. We're exploring music, and we have a composer with us today, and we're talking about her composition. What's the name of the opera?
Florence Comes Home.
Florence Comes Home.
Yeah.
And the opera actually takes place in the year 2009.
Correct.
And it's like 56 years after she passed away, right?
Yeah.
So tell us what's the setting, and you wrote the words. In other words, you wrote
libretto
the libretto
in addition to the music.
Yeah.
So the story is a bit supernatural. So it takes place in St. Anne, Illinois, where a couple comes into this dilapidated home. It's abandoned, and they find all these papers floating around, and they say, "What is this?" And so in the course of the opera, they are encouraged to read these papers and these treasures that are scattered all over the house. They're encouraged to do so by the ghost of Florence, who comes in and is sort of guiding them through the house, and is in a way being remembered in that moment. Yeah, and they realize at the end, we have to do something with this.
Yeah.
You know, she has to be heard.
Yeah. So when a lot of people think about opera, they think Aida or Turandot or something with a cast of 250 people on the stage and so on. It's not like that.
This is chamber music, so it's three singers.
Three singers.
And string quartet.
So you have a soprano, a mezzo-soprano, and a baritone.
Right,
singing,
correct. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is something that can be played in
the shelters.
In the shelters,
that's right.
Specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it has a very intimate quality to it.
Yeah. And what about her music really? What gripped you about her music?
The tunefulness and the harmony, the orchestration too.
Yeah.
Beautiful orchestrations.
Yes, yeah, beautiful orchestrations.
Yeah.
Have you ever played her music in shelters?
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
In fact, it was through playing her music that I had this idea to tell her story.
Oh.
We had done a project about women composers for our shelter audiences, and that was when I was doing research to build several programs for those concerts. I learned about Florence, and I was intrigued by her story. And we played one movement of a piece. She's called Five Spirituals in Counterpoint. Is that,
something like that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Counterpoint is in the title.
Thank you. And we played one of those movements in a performance that had many women composers, and I was quite taken with her music. And I just thought, I really want to explore this composer more. And so after we perform Fran's opera, as she mentioned, we will then play the Five Spirituals in Counterpoint. I think that's the official Five Spirituals in Counterpoint. So our audiences will actually hear 5 short pieces that Florence has created.
So in the opera, she talks about a letter to Koussevitzky, Serge Koussevitzky, the very famous conductor of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, who was kind of a rock of the New England area. And she says, "I have 2 handicaps, those of sex and race." Describe that for us.
Well, I think she felt, famously, he never answered her letter.
Yes.
And she wrote him twice. And, you know, I think she was justified in believing that, you know, her letters went unanswered, partly because of her being female and for being black, you know, so she,
This was at the time when there was hardly any females in the orchestra, in the Boston Symphony Orchestra.
Right. Yeah, sure. So, I mean, you know, and the idea of composing, you know, where you're giving the instructions to the orchestra, that's, you know, amplify that by that much, you know, and that's what she was up against. So.
Was she a performer as well?
Yeah, she was a pianist, organist,
Oh, that's right, she was an organist.
Yeah.
Was that just in church or?
No, she gave her, she was a recitalist, And,
so,
And then so when you go to these shelters, do you tell them the story of Florence before you play the music?
We will tell a little bit about Florence. We always provide our audiences with program notes. Some people are avid readers of the notes. Some people don't care to read the notes. Sadly, some people can't read the notes. We only provide them in English now, but we do have some Spanish speakers in our ensemble who will translate what we're saying for various audience members. So we'll tell a little bit about the story, And then hopefully they'll be able to understand the words. Our singers will all have excellent diction.
Yeah.
And then we will encourage questions. And often the case is that after someone in our audience has heard the work, they have more questions. That the listening stimulates their own wondering and queries about what they've just heard, and then the dialogue between musicians and audience members unfolds. And in this case, we'll be lucky to have Fran at some of the performances, and that is very exciting. We have had composers before. In fact, Fran was at one of the performances of her own work last summer, and it's a terrific opportunity for audience members to realize, wow, this person thought of this in their head, and I just experienced it, and just have access to what it is to create art and to witness art.
So I was wondering, maybe in these shelters, some of the audience members might be musicians as well. Do you get that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because I think the list of penniless composers is very long, is it not?
We've encountered many musicians. A lot of people who have played a more popular instrument genre music. I mean, popular genres such as electric guitar, saxophone players, drummers. There was one gentleman who told me that his entire collection of the late Beethoven string quartet recordings was in his storage unit, and he was really looking forward to getting it out when he had permanent housing.
Yeah.
There was another gentleman who told us that he collected early 20th century pianos, and this man knew so much about obscure 20th century piano composers. It was fascinating.
Oh, interesting.
And the sad thing is homelessness can be experienced by anyone.
Anybody,
and we have many audience members who are highly educated. Their circumstances have just catapulted them into a disastrous time, and they end up in the shelter. And especially people who are familiar with classical music are extremely grateful, because we really changed the dynamic in that place when we come and bring our work and our respect for the people we serve and the respect for our art form.
Yeah, no, I think it's just a wonderful thing that that you do. How did you guys meet?
Let's see.
How did you get to know each other and decide to collaborate?
I think a colleague put the idea in both of our heads, because you attended one of our events a couple of years ago, in which, in fact, we premiered one of our first collaborations with a composer, where I had long had this idea of setting our audience members' words to music.
Oh, yeah.
And so we first started that with a one short movement piece, and Francine came to the concert where the public concert where we included that, and then.
What words are these? People who say things or who've written things?
So
or what?
After our concerts, we ask our audiences for feedback for a number of reasons. One, because we tell them we value what you think, and we want to know so that we can continue to improve our work here.
Yeah.
Two, because we need documentation of the impact of our work for the funding aspect of our organization. And one young woman in 2012 wrote a beautiful poetic statement about how, in spite of everything, hearing the music made her know she would resolve her circumstances, and that she wrote the words, "I am still human, and I know this by hearing this music." And it was much more poetic than what I've just said, and I thought, we should set this to music and bring it back to our audience members. So in 2016, we were able to do that. It was the first time I was able to collaborate with a composer. And it was so well received by our audience members, who said, wow, someone who walked in my shoes inspired a new work of art. And I thought, well, let's expand upon this. And so I was looking around for composers. I wanted women composers to collaborate on this project.
And there was a colleague, Melissa Howe, my colleague at Berkeley. She I remember gave me your name.
Yes, and I remembered Fran's work, and I looked up her work, and indeed she actually had a piece where there was spoken word and then there was a singer. And my idea was to have our audience members' words spoken and then sung, and then there would be an instrumental involvement. Because when we took it back, I wanted the audience members to be able to perform So my idea was we would pass out, we would ask for volunteers, do you want to participate in the concert today? We would pass out the spoken word, and they would have a coach, which ended up being one of our singers, would be right next to the volunteer and say, okay, here, it's your turn to read the words now. And the person would say something such as, the music was water for my soul when it was thirsty. And that was one of the quotes that Fran set to music. And then a singer sang those words, and then I, as a violinist, and our wonderful marimba player gave an instrumental response. And I loved working with Fran, and when I had this idea to have Shelter Music Boston commission an operatic work about Florence, I thought, I'd like to work with Fran again. And so that's how it unfolded, a creative partnership.
So you teach at the Berkeley School of Music. You teach composing, or what?
Composition,
Composition, right?
And actually, Berkeley was super helpful regarding this project, because I wanted to see Florence's letters. I wanted to have the experience that that couple had discovering those papers. And I thought, well, how? So I went to the librarian, this is Rachel Rome, and she said, well, it's all at the University of Arkansas. So I was like, well, am I going to take a trip to the University of Arkansas? I don't know. And I got really lucky, because just around the time that I asked her, they digitized their entire collection. So for anyone who's interested in seeing her handwriting and who she was through her letters and her work, beautiful writing, it's all online, and it's just like going into that house and discovering the letters and discovering her.
And it's a little bit like rectifying a wrong, isn't it? It's, what you're doing now. As you said, Serge Kuzovitsky didn't even bother to write back to her because she was an African American woman.
That's right.
And so on. And the young couple sing in this performance. Her music must be heard. I'd love to hear the opera. I'm looking forward to hearing the opera. What's her legacy, Florence? What?
Well, I think, to know that somebody who can go through what she did and find beauty and music is inspiring to anybody who might be going through something similar. And so,
She credits her mother and father with giving her the sense of art or sight and sound, and her mother's sound, right?
And that's in her letters. That theme is in her letters, They were very art-minded, and her father loved to paint, and her mother was a musician. So I think they gave her that gift. So.
So this is a wonderful collaboration. It's really good to have music, common music, right? As opposed to something that you have to go dress up when you're and go to the symphony to listen to. Not that that's wrong.
There's room for music everywhere, and part of what Shelter Music Boston does, and part of our mission, inherent in our mission, is that everyone deserves access to this great music, and our organization makes it happen for people who can't go to Symphony Hall. Even if they were offered free tickets, which has happened, they are not comfortable with the environment because it's unfamiliar. And it turns out that everyone we perform for loves the music, learns something. In fact, I just was at a Shelter concert earlier this morning, and a young man said didn't know anything about this music, but he loves music. He's so happy to learn about it. And I went up to him afterwards and said, do you think you'll seek this out, like look around for classical music on YouTube? He said, oh yeah, because now I know it's really cool. So music belongs everywhere, and I also feel, as a 21st century artist, it's part of my responsibility to keep my art form relevant. And that means that people who don't know about it can learn about it and find out there's something for them to give or take or leave, but hopefully they will find where they can mesh with it and explore it and use it.
Excellent.
Well, it was a privilege to tell the Florence Price story through music, and it's an unusual, powerful story in that she was the first African American woman to be recognized as a symphonic composer, and to have her music, her symphony, her E minor symphony, premiered by the Chicago Symphony under the direction of Maestro Frederick Stock.
No, I think it's wonderful. The opera, does it have like staging or anything in the background?
Minimal. I mean, it's really people discovering papers and transcripts and scores and so how
long is it about?
About 20 minutes.
About 20
like
minutes. Yeah, it's a short opera.
Yeah,
that's really wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, this is New England Authors. Thank you so much for being with us. It's a pleasure to have to talk about music and to share music as if it was a normal thing and that we don't have to dress up for it. We're talking with Julie Leven and Francine Trester. So good that you can come, and we're looking forward to the opera. Thank you to the Curiosity Foundation, and we record here in Boston. We're heard on stations throughout New England. Remember, watch locally.
Thank you.
Thank you.